Hi everyone, this is Ishan, and I'd like to thank all of you for joining me here today at this movie screening. The movie on display today is One Bridge to the Next, featuring our very special guest, Dr. Jim Withers. This will be followed by the panel, discussion, and student Q&A. And throughout the event, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. And before we get started here, I'd like to give a brief introduction of CNN hero Dr. Jim Withers and some of his amazing accomplishments. So in 1992, Dr. Jim Withers dressed as a homeless person and joined a formerly homeless man to visit the street dwellers of Pittsburgh, making house calls at night. And this initiative led to his program Operation Safety Net that brings medical care and social services directly to the unsheltered homeless. It also serves as a pioneering classroom for students of various disciplines to learn the principles of reality-based care. In 2005, Dr. Withers established the annual International Street Medicine Symposium with current partners in North America, South and Central America, Europe, Australia, Africa, and Asia to foster collaboration and the care of those sleeping on the streets. In 2009, Dr. Withers also created the new nonprofit Street Medicine Institute to promote the global practice of street medicine. Dr. Withers is in practice with the Pittsburgh Mercy Health System on the internal medicine teaching faculty of UPMC Mercy Hospital and an assistant clinical professor of medicine at the University of Pittsburgh. Now, Dr. Withers, would you like to talk a bit more about yourself and what you do?
I guess if I had to characterize myself, I've been on a lifelong journey, and I think that's one of the things I would like to pass back to you guys is that whatever you do, you might want to envision your lives as a journey. I became a doctor, but that certainly wasn't the end of it. I continued to follow things that I saw and believed in, and it led me obviously to a very different path, but it's been a super rewarding one, which I would never have traded for anything. So I'm a street doctor, but I'm also a medical educator and a person who tries to be involved in advocacy and systems change as well.
Thank you. Now I'd like to just take a quick 2 minutes as founder and president of the Homelessness Awareness Initiative to discuss what we do. Our mission is to put an end to homelessness together by raising awareness about it. And we want to champion the needs of homeless people and help people better understand the struggles of the homeless in obtaining decent housing, employment, and overall well-being. For me, how it all started was when I was volunteering at a food drive to help feed homeless people in my community. And as I was prepping meals for our community's homeless, I started wondering about how people became homeless in the first place and what I could do to help alleviate homelessness. And so curiosity led to investigation, and I started visiting various homeless shelters in and around my community. I began asking questions about the causes of homelessness and interviewing local leaders like shelter administrators, city council members, and business leaders to better understand what was being done in support of homeless people. After these discussions, I came to a big realization, which was that solving homelessness starts with spreading awareness about it. And so I began recording these conversations as a way to share what I learned with others in our community. These conversations became the Homelessness Awareness Initiative, and currently we've gathered a group of over 10 volunteers, but we're in the process of recruiting more and are interested in spreading this initiative even further. So if any of you are interested in joining, please feel free to reach out to me at the email I will later put in the chat. Our future plans are to support shelters from all over with food and clothing drives and to continue creating additional videos to generate awareness. Now, without further ado, let's get to the movie. All right, everyone. I hope you guys all enjoyed that film. Now, we'll get to some questions. So first of all, Dr. Withers, what inspired you to get started with the street medicine movement, and how did you get into this kind of work?
Well, it's a good question. It's kind of a deep one for me. I'll try to make it more concise. I think when I was in the hospital early in my teaching career, wearing my white coat, being a doctor, you feel like you're in a very important position, an important place. And there's kind of a lot of power associated with it. But I feel like a lot of the humanity was missing from it. People were coming in and they were vulnerable and scared, and we were not always really aware of their lives, what they were going through. And a lot of times I saw people judging folks who were homeless or who were addicted or who were from abusive situations and things that caused a lot of their illnesses and trauma. And we call them social determinants nowadays, but the tendency was not to be that empathetic or curious, and in fact to judge people. And to me, that just didn't seem right at all. And it was frustrating because even if I really tried to listen to people, they just saw this guy in a white lab coat, in a hurry. And I lost my own humanity in a sense because I wasn't just Jim, And then there was an older guy that came in off the street in the winter, and he left after one day. I tried to get him to stay. Little old guy from the street, and he froze to death when he went back on the street. And so that really got me thinking about who they were, the folks out there, and I felt like for my own growth as a person, as a human, I needed to make a journey, take off the lab coat, and go get to know the people. When I was a kid, I made house calls with my dad, rural Pennsylvania. And so it was kind of like going back to that idea. I just thought I should do some house calls, under bridges. And so I found a guy, Mike, who was willing to take me out, and that's how I got started. But I guess I want just to put the highlighter. I didn't go out as much initially to help homeless people as I did to help myself, to become a more complete human being and to learn what I needed to learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very touching. So how have different experiences with street medicine and the people you've met doing it, have those experiences impacted you?
Well, it's over 30 years now. That film was 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it's become a whole life, pretty much. So sometimes it's hard to, at that point, to say, what it all did. But I would say that it made me a different kind of a person, and I'm really grateful for that. I've had the privilege of being with people when they were suffering and dying and freezing, not just here, but all around the world now. And I think just having them honor me by telling me their lives. And I remember I was in Alaska and visiting and trying to get a program started up there. And this little Inuit guy had a wound, and I just put a bandage, I wrapped it up. And then the next day I happened to see him at the soup kitchen, and I heard him whispering to the guys. He said, "That's my doctor," which is kind of funny because it was just one time I took care of him, but he was so proud and happy that he had his own doctor. So I think that just gives me so much gratitude that people who've been so hurt, so tossed aside, can still trust.
Mhm.
And so I have a lot more I could say about it, but I think that that's one of the most important things to me, is to have the trust of people who have every reason not to trust anybody.
Definitely. So, across the many years you've done this, have you seen any changes in medicine and in homelessness and the way that street medicine is done?
Yeah. So when I started for the first 2 years, I never heard of anyone doing medical work on the streets. And so it was exciting, but it was really like lonely in a way.
Mhm.
And the first place I ever saw someone doing street medicine, or what that activity, was in India. I went to Calcutta, and I visited Dr. Jack Prager, who'd been on the streets since 1979. He retired at age 89. But when I saw him, and he was doing so much of the same stuff I was doing, he was doing it in India, but everything he was doing had the same thought processes. People treated people in the street with the same disrespect. He was fighting against poverty and illness, and I just felt like, wow, I'm not alone. There's someone doing the same thing as me, which was really important. And it was at that point I decided that I would just spend the rest of my life talking about it and traveling and helping other cities start programs. But it didn't get a name until 2005, when I started an annual meeting, and I had to give it a name, so I called it Street Medicine.
Mhm.
And I think it was already growing, but once it got a name in a regular meeting, then it has really taken off. And I get people in Brazil and Israel and St. Petersburg and places in Africa, just contacting me, say, we're starting a street medicine program. And that just blows my mind, because I just made that name up. But they get it, they understand it, they connect to it, and they just do it. And so much of that is driven by students.
Mhm.
We have a student coalition that's really, really active. So I just can't tell you how satisfying it is, because pretty early on, I just got this sense of all the people on the streets all over the world dying and being lonely and not having any hope for medical care. And I thought, that's not right. It's like not having such a thing as a fire department. It just, so creating street medicine with others is just way beyond my wildest dreams of something to be part of. And I think that's changed, first of all, the care of people, but I think it's challenged the thinking of systems that are so used to saying, well, if you have good insurance and you come to us on our terms, we might treat you if you behave well. And it flips the power dynamic upside down.
Mhm.
And it says healthcare should be something that goes to someone and says, I'm really sorry that you're suffering. I'm sorry that life and society have made it so difficult. I apologize, and I'd like to try to help, but I want you to tell me how to do that. So that is a complete 180-degree different from how we usually do healthcare.
Mhm.
So there's some philosophical things that, to me, that are way deeper than just the particular action of street medicine.
Mhm. Yeah, the way street medicine has grown is amazing to hear about. Do you know, like, approximately how many like medical schools it's taught in, or like different
I
places?
think I could text the student coalition, but I think it's somewhere between 50 and 80.
Wow.
I think probably 40, 50 are here in the States, and then there's a smattering all over the rest of the world.
Hmm. So, next question is, are youth affected by homelessness also subject to being helped by the street medicine movement, or is it more for like adults on the street?
That's a great question. It depends on what part of the world you're talking about. We have had in the last 10 years an enormous growth of the number of youth, like 17, 16 to 25 is that kind of the range we talk about. It's unlike anything I knew before. They're called travelers, train hoppers. And so we've all adapted to being more culturally competent, working a lot more on harm reduction. There's a lot of psychological trauma a lot of these young people have had. And there's just a way that they're just not going to put up with people that don't respect them.
Mhm.
Which is, it's fun. It's fun to be able to connect with them. We try to have more youth in our own program, but so that's been a big shift. And yeah, we do. And then some studies show that 40% of the youth are in the LGBTQ community that are homeless. And so you have to be very tuned into that too.
Mhm.
So, but in other countries in Africa, South American places, probably the predominant work that street medicine does is with children. Fortunately, we don't have that.
So on the topic of youth still, what can students and others as well still do to help with homelessness and the street medicine movement?
Well, you're kind of your program is a great example of how you don't have to wait till you're a doctor or whatever. You can start getting involved. And also, your priority of educating yourself and others about the complexities of homelessness is really, really important. There are things you can do that are practical, but I generally feel like unless you have your own organization that has a very specific service that you're providing, it's probably best to link up with organizations where you can watch them, help them maybe, learn what they do right. And sometimes it's really helpful to see what they do badly, because sometimes people who work with people experiencing homelessness think they're doing the right thing, but they re-traumatize people. They disrespect them. They have a plan for them that's not reality based. And so they can be counterproductive. So there is, I think, some value in you guys just being witnesses and analyzing. So I think reflective discussions about what you're seeing is really important.
Yeah.
To process. So much of the ultimate problem, I think, is the otherness. At least traditionally, that's been the case. Yeah, there's poverty, there's violence, there's racism, there's all kinds of issues that you guys could read about and talk about. There's a book called Evicted. I think you might be fascinated with if you haven't read it. But there's so many things that I think fall into the category of structural violence, if you're not familiar with that term. It's a very important concept. But I think just being able to speak to people who are judging people they don't know, if you can speak thoughtfully, in a well-educated way to them, then you're doing a huge favor. I've enjoyed working with medical students, nursing students, medical residents, because they are ready to hear and have fresh eyes, and then they go on and they really change the whole system from within.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what's the state of Operation Safety Net, and Has this expanded to any other regions of the U.S.?
Yeah, like I said, we have probably close to 100 street medicine programs in the United States. I think there's 40 some in just California. So yeah, it's like what happens is we get one going in like Detroit or Santa Barbara or someplace, and then it begins to spread itself. It's almost like an infection. The Street Medicine Institute tries really hard to be on top of that and to help consultations and help assist them, depending on what kind of program they are, to do a good job and to learn from experience. But it's like the cat's out of the bag now, and it's just growing like crazy. And I do like to kind of think of the analogy. There was a time when all fire departments were just volunteer or they didn't have them. And so I think it's a historical time.
Yeah.
And we have a fellow. I mean, like you'd have a cardiology fellow. We have our own fellow at Operation Safety Net. There's another fellowship in Fort Worth, Texas, and another one's going to start in Detroit. So that's really amazing to me that it's got to the point where you can actually have a fellowship.
Yeah, that definitely sounds amazing. Having worked with homeless people for so long now, do you feel like there are any common misconceptions people seem to hold about them?
Yes, many. And even people experiencing homelessness, I feel, have misconceptions about themselves, if that makes sense. If you really get into all this, you'll probably start reading books like Pedagogy of the Oppressed, books in which very wise people have looked at the effects of long-term oppression and racism on people. It can create a sense of hopelessness and shame and guilt in people that are suffering, which isn't really justified, because a lot of these things, it's like a game that's stacked against folks. And so that's a complicated thing. What was your question?
Any misconceptions people?
Oh, yeah. I mean, one of the things, this is just my obsession as a teacher. There are a lot of philosophers that talk about this. But if you're going to learn about anything or anybody, especially, you really have to wipe your mind clean. And don't come in necessarily with preconceptions or boxes that you're just waiting to cleverly put them into. You have to allow reality to teach you what it is, which is really difficult, because we're inclined and we're pushed by society to make judgments about people we don't know. There's a lot of good stuff on addiction that's coming out. There's a series on Roku called The Fix, in which they just flip addiction upside down. The short sort of summary of that is that the use of drugs and alcohol is way more about what you're going through or what you've been through than about the drug. So it's more of an adaptation to a living hell that you've either in or that you've been through. And most people don't look at addiction that way. They don't see it as an alternate to jumping off a bridge. And if that's your only alternative in your mind, then you're a genius for using drugs or alcohol rather than jumping off the bridge. But it's really hard for people to get close enough to someone to see that truth.
Yeah, I can start to see how that could happen. You said that over back when you were a student, you saw that many people in the medical industry seemed like very cold to these people, like they were very uncaring, judgmental. Do you think the medical industry now is better suited to deal with homelessness? And if not, like how can it improve?
I think it's improved.
Hmm.
The guy that froze to death, one of the things that egged me on to do something was I heard people talking about whenever a person homeless came in frozen, they would call them bumsicles instead of popsicles. And there's so much of that kind of, it's emotional push away. It's, whatever. The police do it too, paramedics, anybody that's in the front lines. I'm sure people in the military do it. But it's a symptom of your own soul being lost when you start talking like that or thinking like that. I think that things have been changing. I'm not sure exactly what drives that. I think society in general is being forced to deal with things that when I was a kid, I don't even want to talk to you about how racist and ugly things just were assumed to be. And I probably participated in that stuff because I grew up in rural Pennsylvania. So I think we're evolving. I do think that the younger people coming up demand sensitivity and empathy and humanity from their own systems. So I think that's a big force of driving it. We kind of follow society a little bit. I wouldn't like to say that most of healthcare leads. It tends to follow.
Mm-hmm. All right, and that was very informative for me. You've answered all my questions. I guess we'll move on to some of the student questions now.
Okay, those are good questions.
Thank you. One of the questions was, how has COVID impacted street medicine, and has the volume of patients increased or decreased since the film came out?
COVID was as with everybody and everything. The only thing I could that remotely remember that reminded me of that was I was a first year medical resident when HIV was just hitting the scene. And there's a book called My Own Country, which is a really good book about that time. But what it did was it caused people to fear people in the gay community, hate them, vilify them. And it was an awful time. And it was a real test to see whether you were going to become part of that hate group. And when I say hate, I mean, on a spectrum. I mean, in the hospital, people wouldn't draw blood on folks. They wouldn't put IVs in them. They wouldn't do procedures on them. And we had to do the blood work and stuff because people were just like, they were going to let them die rather than risk getting infected. And it was very cowardly.
Wow.
And I was proud to be there and one of the people that was able, but also forced to just deal with it. And I became proud of that. And so it reminded me a little bit of that because everyone was blaming everybody for COVID. I remember people were stigmatizing the homeless for a while. It's ironic because it turned out that the people in the campsites they were the last people to get COVID. So if anything, we were putting them in danger by going out to them. They weren't the dirty ones. We were, so to speak. We had to change all of our protocols like everybody else did. And so it was a really challenging time, but it was exciting too, to be there for people in need. And then with all the shelter situations and we could get into that, but the whole city had to get together and do stuff that it never did before.
Yeah.
The number of people that we serve kind of comes and goes. I'd say recently there's been more than ever.
Oh, really?
But we had made a big dent. We got into housing really heavily in Pittsburgh, and we were able to decrease the number of homeless by probably a third or so, or half. But it's like a multifactorial thing.
Mhm.
There's economy, there's housing prices, there's what administration is in power and what funds are available. And so during COVID, there was a big push, and we got a lot of people off the street using funds and all those things. But then this past year, it's just everywhere in the country, it's just exploded, the number of people in tents and everything.
Mhm.
I'm not sure I understand it all.
Another student's question was, what's one of your most memorable memories, and how has the practice changed since the film?
Well, for some reason, and I have wonderful people working with me. I've always had wonderful people come. It's been a whole series of them, 30 years, but the people I have right now are just incredible. And they would have their own best stories from the last 5 years. Somehow, most of my best stories are in the 90s. I don't know why that is. Those are the ones that were vivid to me more. I'll tell the story of Richie. So Richie was a guy we met. He lived in a pile of garbage behind an abandoned loading dock. I just crawled up there and walked back and thought there might be someone there, and sure enough, there he was. He was an alcoholic, drinking pretty hard. He had been a Korean War vet, which tells you how long ago that was. He had a cough, but we couldn't get him to go anywhere. But he was sweet, and he was lonely, clearly. And so we would visit him, try to get him to go get an X-ray or whatever. He wouldn't do it. And then we brought our first nurse out, a woman, and he was kind of shocked that a woman was willing to look at him, even talk to him. I could see that affected him. And he wanted us to stay longer. So we said, if you're not quite as drunk, we'll stay a little longer. And he modified his drinking. And then one night, though, I just decided that he was stuck. And part of the reason he was stuck is because he was sleeping in broken bottles and his own poop. And he just felt like he was probably the garbage that he was sleeping in. And so I said, you know what we're going to do tonight? We're just going to get 20 big garbage bags, and we're just going to clean his place. Not telling him he has to do anything. We're just going to clean it up. And so we went down with gloves and everything, and he held a flashlight. We took the stuff away, and then somebody gave me a piece of carpet, so I put it down, a dry place. And then the nurse came back and gave him a haircut, tetanus shot. And the next week we visited him, and he was pretty sober. And he had a bottle. He had some flowers in it. Surprised me. And then he showed us pictures of his family. He had a good singing voice. And then after another week or two, he said, Doc, I want to get out of here, which is kind of miraculous, because at the time we first met him, he was like, nah, leave me alone. And so we got him into a place, and I went to visit him for lunch. And I said, Richie, do you have the pictures of your family? He said, oh, it's back at my camp. So we got my little car, went down in the day, crawled back there. He looked around. He finally found the pictures. And as he was walking out, he just stopped and looked around. He said, Doc, how could a human being live in a place like this? And so, when I first met him, if I had a clipboard and I said, do you want to be housed? Do you want to get into a shelter? Do you want medical care? He would have said, no, no, no. And I could have marked that on my clipboard. And I could have done a study and I could have proved that these people don't want help. I'd have a statistic. But once we helped him visualize his own worth in a non-coercive way, then he was transformed, and he was the same guy. And he was looking at this garbage. He was saying, how could a human live like this? So I think when you take a snapshot of a person and you judge them from that, or even they judge themselves, that's not really all that has to be. So he was one of the many people that taught me stuff like that. I consider the people on the street teachers for me.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful story. Next question from students. Has seeing the conditions of some of the people you help taken a toll on you or anyone around you?
I think it has. I've had a long time to process it. I think one of the moments when I had to do something different was I was in People magazine, and so I got some publicity in '96, and somebody famous sent me $1,000 check and said, you should be cloned. And I thought, and it was made out to me. So I said, Mike, I know what I want to do with this $1,000. I was so tired of people dying and being forgotten, cremated or not claimed or whatever. And they were really important humans to me. And I would walk around, I would see where someone was murdered or froze or whatever. And that began to kind of like build. And so I said, we're going to buy plaques. And from when we first started, we're going to try to remember everybody. And we're going to have a plaque that says, we remember. And then their name or nickname and the year they died. So we went back to actually 89 because Mike knew someone back then, but pretty much started with 92 for me. And we were going to put them wherever someone died, like they do with bicycles now. But the police wouldn't let us do that. So we went to the mayor's office, and he said, "Oh, we'll give you a wall." So that's that memorial wall that was in the thing. But I needed something. I needed something to say. And the thing above that, if you didn't get to read it, it says, we remember those who lived and died on our streets. May you watch over us from a warm, loving home above. And so it remembers them, but it also is like an indictment that, in Pittsburgh at least, that people are still dying. I looked at that in the film and I thought, oh my gosh, it's like 3 times as many names now. Mm-hmm. And we have December 21st is National Homeless Memorial Day. And every city probably has something, but we have a candlelight service right there. So those are the kinds of things that you can do to process that and honor people and tell funny stories. And it's really special because people come from the camps, some family members come. And so that's the kind of stuff you have to do. I see new people in the last 10 years or whatever breaking down and just being devastated. And I don't anymore. Once in a blue moon, I get really upset. I'm not even sure what that's about. So I hope I'm not numb. Mm-hmm. But for me, it's kind of become a different story. It's kind of like a long experience. It's like anybody in a field where they're suffering. And so I'm way more philosophical. I love people just as much, but I'm way more philosophical. I don't try to save everybody. I do, but it's like if they die, I don't take it like a personal failure, maybe like I used to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the plaque in the movie, it was very touching to see that the people are still being memorialized in some way, even if they couldn't get like a proper burial or
and when I gave lectures with photos of that, I say to the medical residents, I said, well, is this medicine? Because it's usually closer to the end of the talk. And then I make them try to tell me why they think it is or isn't healthcare. And my thought is that the basis of healthcare is that people actually matter. Everybody matters. That's an assumption not everyone believes in, but to me, that's a sacred thing that has to do with our place in society as healers, and that you have to grieve and honor the people that didn't make it. And it's good for all of us. The people on the street, it was funny, I was in front of that wall and I was showing someone from out of town, and this guy who was homeless came over. He didn't recognize me. He didn't know who I was. And he started telling us, like, you know what this wall is? And he was saying, these people are dying out here. And it was great because he owned it. He was just like such a supporter of the wall. I loved it.
All right, last student question. Was there difficulty or challenges in starting street medicine?
Starting stuff is really fascinating to me. I think it's been kind of one of the side hobbies is analyzing all this stuff. If you ever read Joseph Campbell, he's a person who did typologies of mythology. And so some of the books I love, and I guess my own life fits what he called the hero's quest, which is like Bilbo is in the Shire and some wizard comes along and says, you got to leave. And he's like, no way. I'm here in the hospital. I'll get sued. There's people, I don't even know who they are. And so the journey begins in the classic myth. And then on the trail, you meet people you'd never meet, wizards and ogres and elves and all kinds of folks that help you or try to hurt you. And in the process of the journey, you grow. You become something that you weren't before. So I became a street doctor, which I wasn't before. And I find it just so fascinating. But the beginnings are so interesting because there's such a moment of whether you're going to take the journey or not. We could talk about that a lot, but I think it's a matter of curiosity and integrity, empathy. Curiosity is a lot of it. Yeah. But I think once you begin, and there may be types of people that, definitely there are types of people that do more adventuring and journeying and pioneering than others. And so most of my friends tend to be these days like that. You're like that. I could tell.
All right. I have one last question for you. So, what message would you like to leave the audience with?
I would say be open about who other people are. Be open about what's possible. Because there'll be a lot of people telling you you'll shoot your eye out, and you got to be careful about that. But there'll be lots of people that are great authorities on people they don't know. And after a while, you begin to say, oh, okay. I recognize someone who's an expert on someone they've never met. It doesn't make them more authoritative. It makes them more frightened because they're just trying to bluff their way out of something they're afraid to look at. So don't buy into those kinds of thinkings. If you see something wrong, trust yourself. You're not crazy. I think that's the last word I'd say. You're not crazy.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Withers, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to do this. To all the student participants, I hope you all enjoyed this event and would be interested in doing this again. We have a post-event survey for you guys, so please fill that out. And yeah, thank you all for coming to this movie screening. Have a good rest of your night.
You too.